My name is Emma, but everyone calls me Grandma Emma. I am 74 years old, and I carry with me a lifetime of struggles, joys, and scars that time has left. I thought that in old age I would find peace. I thought my days would be made of calm, cups of tea in the yard, and laughter from my grandchildren running around the house. But I was wrong. Old age may be silent, but sometimes it is a heavy silence, full of pain and bitter memories. Since my grandson Brian came to live with me, my routine has changed. He is only 16 years old, but already carries in his eyes the rebellion of those who believe that the whole world owes him something. His mother, my eldest daughter, had to move from town because of work and asked me to look after him for a few months. I accepted immediately because I always believed that a grandmother's love could fill any void. At first, I saw Brian as a confused boy, just needing direction. He would come home from school, drop his backpack on the floor, and climb up to the room without greeting me. I didn't call so much. I thought it was a teenager thing. Prepared his plate, left it on the table, and waited patiently for him to come down to eat. Sometimes he came. Other times, he let the food cool, as if my effort had no value. But there was a day when I realized that it wasn't just carelessness, it was disrespect. It was a rainy afternoon. I was in the kitchen preparing an apple pie, a recipe I learned from my mother. The sweet smell spread throughout the house. I remembered when Brian was little and asked to lick the filling spoon. But that day, when I called for him, I did not hear an answer. I climbed the stairs carefully, leaning on the railing, and knocked at the door. "Brian, the pie is ready, honey." He opened the door abruptly. The headphones were still hanging on his neck, and loud music was leaking out. He didn't look me in the eyes. "I don't want it, Grandma," he said dry. "Okay, but at least sit with me for a while. I did it thinking of us both." He bugged, and then it happened. When I tried to hold his hand to guide him into the kitchen, he pushed me. It was not a push strong enough to hurt me badly, but enough to unbalance me. I fell sideways in the corridor, hitting my arm against the wall. The sound of the fall echoed through the house. My heart exploded. I felt a sharp pain in my shoulder, and pride, because it was not the physical pain that hit me the most, but the shock of seeing my own grandson, the one I cradled in his arms as a baby, treat me with such coldness. He stood still, looking. No guilt in the eyes, only irritation. "Ma, I said I don't want to," he said, before slamming the door and going back to the room. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to catch my breath. The tears came down on their own, beyond my control. It was not just the pain in my arm, it was the heart that hurt, as if every beat reminded me of how much respect had been lost. I stood up slowly, leaning against the railing. I went back to the kitchen and sat in silence. The pie was cooling on the table, forgotten. I picked up a cup of tea and looked at the steam rising, thinking about where I had failed. Did we spoil this generation too much? Do they believe that everything is due to them? That night, lying in my bed, I realized that my house, once so full of happy memories, now seemed full of shadows. The laughter of the past had been silenced, giving way to a heavy silence. I knew that fall would not be the last. I knew that something inside Brian was turning into something I didn't recognize. And there, alone, I promised myself, I will tell my story. Not to expose my grandson, but to show the world the price we pay when respect is abandoned. The morning after that fall, I woke up with a sore body. My shoulder was throbbing and my leg was still sensitive from the fall. I stood up slowly, leaning on the edge of the bed, and put on my favorite wool coat, that blue one I sewed by hand years ago. I tried to act as if it was just an accident, but inside, something burned. The memory of Brian's cold look. I prepared breakfast as usual. Toast, scrambled eggs, and milk. I put everything on the table, set the napkin next to his plate. I waited. The minutes passed, and I only heard the noise of the room door opening when I was already finishing my tea. He went down the stairs without looking at me, took a toast, and left in a hurry. "Good morning, Brian," I spoke softly. He did not answer, just opened the door and left the house in silence. I sat looking at the full plate I had prepared for him. The emptiness of that chair hurt me more than the pain in my body. It was as if every gesture of mine, every attempt to take care of him, I received in return only indifference. I spent the rest of the morning thinking about what to do. I called my daughter, but didn't want to worry her, just said that Brian was having trouble adjusting. She replied in a hurry, "Oh, Mom, it's the adolescence phase. He already changes." But I knew it was not just a phase. There was something darker growing within him, an impatience, an unnamed anger. That afternoon, he came home from school with heavy eyes. He threw his backpack on the couch and climbed up without saying anything. I went up behind him, determined to talk. I knocked on the door of the room. "Brian, can we talk for a minute?" He opened the door slowly, but did not invite me in. "What is it, Grandma?" "I just wanted to understand why you're so mad at me. Did I do something that hurt you?" He laughed dryly, almost scornfully. "You don't understand. You just treat me like a child. But I'm your grandmother, baby. My job is to take care of you." It was then that he raised his voice. "I don't need anyone to take care of me." The scream echoed inside me like a slap. He slammed the door, and I heard the key spin in the lock. It locked. I was standing in the hall, alone. That night, when I was already lying down, I heard footsteps in the corridor. I got up slowly and opened the bedroom door. He was going through my cupboards in the living room, turning drawers, looking for something. "Brian, what are you doing?" He looked at me with impatience. "I'm just looking for money. I need it." "Money? But why?" I asked, scared. He didn't answer. He just hit the drawer hard, gently pushed me over, and went up the stairs. I felt my heart accelerate. This was no longer the common rebellion of youth. There was something more, a contempt, a lack of limits that scared me. The next morning, I noticed that some notes had disappeared from my wallet. Little money, but enough to make me restless. I sat down on the couch and started writing in my diary. I always wrote in it, since I was very young. It was the only way to organize my thoughts. I wrote, "My grandson pushed me. My grandson took my money. Who is this boy I don't recognize anymore? Where was the boy who smiled when I picked him up from school?" Tears watered the pages. During dinner, I tried again to talk. I made his favorite food, roast chicken with potatoes. I put everything on the table, filled the glasses of juice. He came down, looked at the plate, and without saying a word, pulled his phone out of his pocket and began to move, completely ignoring me. The following days were a test of my patience. Brian seemed increasingly distant, almost as if he wanted to prove that he could live without me. It was not just silence, it was contempt in every gesture. He passed me in the corridor and turned his face, left the dirty dishes stacked in the sink, closed the doors with force as if my presence was a constant nuisance. I tried to pray, asking God for strength not to lose my temper. But deep down, there was a fear growing inside me. Something told me that it would not end well. On Friday afternoon, after school, I heard the door slamming violently. Brian entered the house in anger. "What happened, my son?" I asked, approaching. "Nothing," he shouted, throwing the backpack on the floor. The noise echoed through the room. He walked from one side to the other, punching his own hands, as if fighting something invisible. "If you need to vent, you can talk to me," I insisted, trying to be calm. It was then that he exploded. "You don't understand anything about my life. You keep treating me like a useless child." I took a step back. His look was heavy, almost gloomy. "I just want to help you, Brian." He came towards me so fast that I barely had time to react. He grabbed my arm and pushed me against the wall. I felt the pain through my back, the whole body tremble. "Don't get involved," he cried, with his face inches from mine. For a second, I thought he was going to hit me, but he just left me and ran up the stairs, slamming the door of the room. I was paralyzed in the corridor, my hands shaking. My shoulder hurt where he had held me with force. More than physical pain, it was the shock. Never in all my life had anyone treated me like this. I sat on the couch, trying to take a deep breath. My mind screamed, "This is not the Brian that I raised as a baby. This is not the boy who asked for stories before bed." I picked up the phone and almost called my daughter, but I stopped. What would I say? That her son had pushed me against the wall? That I was afraid of being alone with him? She wouldn't believe it. I would say I was exaggerating. I stayed up all night. At every noise in the house, I was amazed. The sound of his steps upstairs made me tense, as if at any moment it could happen again. The next morning, I made coffee, but could not eat. Brian went down, took only an apple, and left without looking at me. I saw him crossing the street with his hands in his pocket, and my heart was tightening. Something in him was getting lost every day. On Sunday afternoon, it happened again. I was in the kitchen washing dishes when I heard the noise of drawers being opened in the room. I ran to see. He was going through my old dresser where I keep pictures and small savings. "Brian, please stop it," I asked. He looked at me with impatience. "I already said I need money." "But steal from me? You're my grandson." It was at this moment that he closed the drawer with violence, pushed me aside, and shouted, "Shut up, old woman!" I tripped and almost fell, leaning on the chair. My heart shot. Hearing that word, old, said with so much hatred, hurt more than the push. He ran up, slamming doors. I stood there with tears running down my face and my chest burning. That night, I wrote in my diary, "My grandson pushed me again. He yelled at me. He called me old as if I were a burden. Did I lose him forever?" The pages were blurred by tears. On Monday, I made a decision. I could no longer ignore it. If I continued in silence, perhaps one day he would go too far. I decided to start observing, writing down every detail. Not to accuse him, but to remind myself that it was not my imagination, that it was really happening. I started to hide my wallet, locking some drawers, walking more slowly near him, like someone who walks near an angry animal. I didn't want to live like this, but the fear had already settled inside my own home. And every day, Brian seemed to test even more my limits. Sometimes it was the cold silence. Sometimes it was the look of contempt. Sometimes it was the brusque push. As if at each act he wanted to measure how far he could go without consequences. Deep down, I knew. It would not end in hard words. Something much worse was yet to come. That week, the tension inside the house became unbearable. I no longer slept properly. Any door rattling made me wake up scared, with my heart pounding. The feeling of living inside my own home felt more like living in a minefield. On Wednesday evening, Brian arrived upset. I heard the gate slamming hard, the steps hurrying into the porch. The door opened with a bang. He came in dropping the shoes in the middle of the room and throwing the backpack against the sofa. "Good night, Brian," I dared to say, trying to keep my voice steady. "Don't bother me," he replied without looking at me. I felt my stomach wrap, but I stood, watching him go up the stairs. The noise of the door closing echoed throughout the house. The next day, he came home late for school. He took only a piece of bread from the table and began to devour it right there without saying a word. "Do you want me to make a quick coffee?" I asked. He stared at me with a silent fury, chewing as if my question was an insult. "I don't need you," he muttered, spitting out the words like poison. That hurt. I took a deep breath, but did not answer. I had already learned that every word could become fuel for his anger. On Friday, late in the afternoon, what I had so feared happened. I was folding clothes in the room when I heard the noise of drawers being opened again. I ran to the room and found him moving my purse. "Brian!" I shouted. "Enough!" He turned quickly, his eyes red, and threw my wallet on the floor. "I just wanted $20. Is that too much to ask?" "It's theft, Brian," I answered firmly, trying to control the trembling of my voice. "Steal from your own grandmother?" He snorted, came to me, and pushed me hard. I tripped. I tried to hold on to the table, but slipped. The floor seemed to spin for a second before crashing with my whole body against it. The pain exploded in my hip and back. I felt the air escape from my lungs as if someone had crushed me. "Brian," I murmured, unable to get up. For a moment, I saw in his eyes something that looked like regret, but it was quick. He turned his back and ran up the stairs, leaving me lying on the ground. Stood there for minutes, trying to catch my breath. The pain was unbearable. I managed to drag myself to the couch and with much effort sat down. The heart was pounding in my chest. Tears were pouring out without me being able to contain them. "My God," I whispered, shaking hands. "My grandson threw me to the ground." It was as if the plug had finally fallen. The boy I once held in my arms, who once smiled at me with milk teeth, now looked at me as an enemy. That night, I could hardly lie down. My whole body hurt. I spent hours sitting in the armchair with a blanket on my shoulders, looking at the dark ceiling. The house was quiet, but each creak sounded like a warning that I was no longer safe. The next morning, I tried to act as if nothing had happened. I made coffee, prepared toast, as usual. Brian came down, took a cup, ate in silence. He didn't even look at me. The purple mark on my arm, however, did not let me forget. I looked at him and, for the first time, felt something that I never thought I would feel about my grandson. Real fear. I realized that I could no longer hide, that silence was not to protect, but to surrender myself to danger. I needed to talk to someone, needed to ask for help before it was too late. I picked up the phone when Brian left and dialed my daughter. My hand was shaking so much that I almost dropped it. "Hi, Mom," she answered. It took me a while to answer. Tears came before words. He pushed me. I fell on the floor. I'm all purple, baby. I don't know what to do." On the other side of the line, the silence was too long. My daughter sighed. "Mom, he's just a teenager. You know how they are." That was like a stab. I expected solace, but received disbelief. "No, daughter, it's not just adolescence. He knocked me down. He left me lying on the ground." Her voice hardened. "Mom, please don't overdo it. I'll talk to him, okay?" The call ended, and I stood there, phone in hand, feeling more alone than ever. That night, I wrote again in the diary. "Today, my grandson knocked me down. I felt pain, I felt fear, I felt shame. I called my daughter, and she didn't believe me. I am alone in this struggle, but I must resist. I cannot let it destroy the little that remains of my dignity. I closed the diary with trembling hands. I knew that from then on, the story could not follow the same. Either I found the courage to face the truth, or I would be swallowed by silence and fear. And something inside of me was starting to change. For the first time, I stopped seeing Brian as just the lost grandson. I began to see him as someone who could hurt me without remorse. This revelation, however painful it was, would be the turning point of my life. After that push, something in me changed. It wasn't just physical pain. It was a dark certainty that silence would now slowly kill me. I decided that I would not be silent anymore. I hid my wallet, locked drawers, left the house with the doors always locked. I started to write everything down, dates, times, words that hurt, and hid the diary in the bottom of my bed linen. On Monday, my daughter called to say that she would talk to Brian. I thought it was the beginning of something. I wanted to believe. But when he came home that night, something in his eyes said the conversation had not worked. He entered more closed than before. The backpack hung with violence and passed me like a stranger. I avoided provoking him. I spoke quietly, prepared the soup, put the plate on the table. He ate in silence, his eyes stuck in emptiness. "Did you talk to my mother?" she asked. "Yes, dear. She said she would talk to you." I tried not to sound accusatory. He nodded ungraciously and finished eating too fast. He got up abruptly and went to the room. I stood there, holding the spoon, feeling my whole body tense. That night, it smelled like a storm. Hours later, I heard doors slamming, muffled voices. I got up slowly and went to the corridor. He was in the room, the figure all closed, talking on the phone with red face. When he hung up, widened his eyes to see me at the door. "Did you tell my mother everything?" she asked, her voice filled with anger. I called, yes. I needed someone to know. I took a deep breath. I didn't think. "I don't need your help," he interrupted, and the tone cut like a blade. I tried to retreat, but he advanced. It was so fast that there was no time to ask for calm. He grabbed my arm with force, pulled me by the elbow. I felt his nails sticking into the skin. I counted mentally to 3, expecting any gesture of remorse, but he pushed me hard against the ladder. The world has turned. I remember the button of the old blouse grabbing the handrail. I remember the dry pull that dragged me some steps. Then came the impact, the body beating, the head bouncing against the wood, the air escaping from the lungs. The pain exploded like thunder, but the most frightening was the silence that followed. A heavy silence, full of eyes that did not belong to me. I tried to move, and the world collapsed again. The vision darkened at the edges. I don't know how long I lay there between the steps. The clock on the wall seemed to laugh at my despair. I heard the phone in the room ring, a distant and metallic sound. I heard footsteps? Maybe. I heard the door? Maybe Brian left? Maybe he locked the house. The voices were far apart, as if they came through a thick curtain. When I regained a little of consciousness, I felt something warm in my head. Blood? I couldn't really see it. The pain was like a continuous alarm that did not cease. I tried to rise, and a vertigo knocked me down. My legs trembled as if they were someone else's. I crawled, grasping the railing with nails marked by force, trying to reach the corridor where the phone was. Each movement pulled a new pain, but the only desire that sustained me was to ask for help. Help! I managed to suffocate, the voice thin and hoarse. I don't know if it was seconds or minutes. I heard footsteps that weren't Brian's, quick steps on the other side of the door. Someone knocked. A neighbor? Linda from the apartment next door always came to return something when I forgot. The key turned, the door opened with force, and she entered, her face scared. His eyes landed on me, and the world around made sense again.
"Emma!" she almost screamed. "My God, what happened?" I tried to speak. The words escaped in short sighs. Linda shouted for help. The sound of the steps were now multiple. I heard voices, doors slamming. I felt hands pull me carefully, turn me around, look at the blood, the swelling in my hip. No one talked about the grandson. At that moment, it seemed that the most important thing was to get me out of there. As I stood up, I felt the presence of Brian at the end of the hall. He was leaning against the wall, breathing breathlessly, his eyes avoiding those of others. I don't know if he wanted to go out, if he wanted to be seen. I only remember a look that passed by me. It was not of guilt, nor concern. It was a dry, impatient look. When Linda asked aggressively what had happened, he murmured something and tried to walk away. They did not allow. The curiosity and anger of the people who loved me turned into action. A neighbor called the ambulance. Another covered my legs with a blanket. Linda held my hand and repeated that I was safe now. The ambulance siren was the sweetest sound I heard that night. As they put me on the stretcher, I saw Brian take a step back and disappear through the back door, as if the house finally kicked him out. I don't know if it was me who rebuked him in the look, or if it was his conscience. Only know that, for a second, he turned his face like someone who sees for the first time the dimension of what he did. And I saw nothing but fear to be discovered. Inside the ambulance, between lights and professional voices, I thought about all the times that I cradled him as a baby, in the sleepless nights, in the hard work of a life to give him a roof. Now I was there, with my body marked and my heart in pieces, feeling that something had been broken beyond the physical. Dignity, love, confidence. The paramedic spoke to me quietly, asked me to stay calm, put on serum, said they were going to the hospital. I passed through the corridors of the house once again, looking at the empty room, to the steps where everything had changed. I thought about what I had decided in my diary: no more silence. But on that stretcher, with the lights flashing and a hand welcoming mine, that decision gained another weight. "Emma, hold my hand," said Linda, as I felt the ambulance move. "You did the right thing in calling for help." I held her hand with strength and tried to answer. The voice came out weak. "I don't want it to end like this." And while the ambulance cut off the street, I looked out of the window at the house that had welcomed me for so many years, and thought, for the first time clearly, that life could not continue as before. Something needed to change, and I was determined not to let the fall erase me. I woke up in the hospital, with the cold clarity of lamps and the constant sound of appliances. I felt my body heavy, each bone screaming. There was a bandage on the forehead, a support in the arm, and a throbbing pain in the hip that did not let me forget the fall. For a moment, I did not recognize where it was. Then the memory came like a flood. The push, the steps, the blood, the neighbor Linda, the ambulance, and Brian. Always Brian. My daughter was sitting in the armchair next to me, her eyes red from crying. When she realized I had awakened, she ran to me. "Mom, thank God. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have doubted you." I held her hand, feeling the weight of everything. "Daughter, he knocked me down. You need to understand that I can't live like this anymore." She cried harder and nodded. "I know, Mother. Now I know." A few days later, still in the hospital, I saw Brian enter the room. He was cranky, but without true humility. "Hi, Grandma," I said, almost in a whisper. I looked at him and spoke with the firmness that gathered from within the pain. "Brian, I love you, but you hurt me in a way that I can no longer ignore. As of today, you will no longer live with me. Your mother will take care of you. I need my peace, my dignity." My daughter took a deep breath and completed, "Brian, you come with me. There is no more choice. It's time to take the consequences." He did not argue. He just lowered his head, took the backpack, and left the room. Deep down, maybe he knew it was the end of that coexistence. The following weeks were marked by visits from social workers, psychologists, and local authorities. Brian was called to be heard, and every detail of his living with me began to be analyzed seriously. The coldness with which he described some episodes scared the professionals, but also made it clear that he needed urgent follow-up. It was then determined that he would undergo intensive psychological treatment and constant monitoring to prevent his actions from putting others at risk. The mother, until then absent, received the direct responsibility of taking care of him, since it was forbidden to continue living with me. Even with a tight heart, I felt a silent relief. The pain of being mistreated by her own grandson would never be forgotten, but knowing that they were finally taking the case seriously brought me a thread of hope. The case of Emma and Brian was not just a family story, but a warning to everyone. How many grandmothers do not suffer silences? How many do not carry in silence the pain of lack of respect and even aggression within their own home? If this story touched you, do not ignore the signs of disrespect or violence against the elderly. Share this video and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Help spread awareness, and remember, respect and love are the true legacy we left behind.